everybody back to Segal Talks here at the Marnie Segal Theater Center at the Graduate Center CUNY in the middle of New York City and in Midtown Manhattan. It looks still like a ghost town. It looks like every day one more store closes down. And as we heard from Ann Hamburger, the producer, we shall do a festival in December in New York in the Meatpacking District in all the empty stores, and which normally is impossible to get to be done or to find some right now. It's very, very easy, I guess, to spot these and also talk people into using them. So today we have another day of Corona, of the experience of living through this unprecedented time, also tumultuous political time with the election coming up next week. With the pandemic soaring around the world, France is considering going back into lockdown, also Germany, many, many others. Numbers have never been as high in the United States. It's hitting so many areas. And the role of the arts and what is the meaning of the arts and what is the meaning of our lives, of course, never has been more questioned. What is necessary, what is important, what has been unimportant, and we thought it was important. We are reevaluating everything. And everybody agrees this is a time of change. Change has already happened. Change will happen. And artists are the ones who are on the side of change, teaching us how to deal with it, how to experience it, how to find meaning, also how to anticipate it and make us comfortable with what might be coming and help us to imagine the future. And that is what theater does. It's an imagining of a possibility as people who are on the streets who demonstrate for Black Lives Matter or others. They really imagine a different world, a different place, and they put their bodies out on the line, as do theater people with the acting on stage, in front or behind. Today we have artists from our ongoing Prelude Festival. Since 15 years, the Segal Center puts out a festival, the only one in New York of its kind that is free and open to the public. And it shows work in progress just from New York City artists, ensembles. It's a work from that takes the temperature of what New York artists are working on, what they are thinking about, what they're envisioning, what the imagination is taking them. And it's always been a significant, I think, contribution to the field. And perhaps right now it has an additional urgency. We invited David Brun and Miranda Harmon to curate it. And David is with us here with some of the Prelude artists. A few words about David. David is one of the co-curators, together with Miranda, of the Segal Center's Prelude Festival. He's also a dramaturg, a critic, and a doctoral candidate at Yale School of Drama, where he studies contemporary theater and performance. And so welcome, David. And welcome all you Prelude artists who have already shown work, which still can be seen, and some is upcoming. So maybe we'll go around and we start with Mei Ann. Tell us a little bit about you, a short introduction, and then we go into the discussion.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mei Ann Teo. I am calling in from Williamsburg currently, even though my home country is Singapore. And I work at the intersection of artistic, civic, and contemplative practice. Thanks.
Thank you. Misha.
Hi, folks. It's wonderful to be here. My name is Misha Chowdhury. I am based in New York, but I'm currently being a country mouse up in the Berkshires while I can. I'm a director and a writer and a many-tentacled theater maker. And I'm psyched to be in conversation with all these wonderful folks today.
Dominique?
Hey, I'm Dominique. I'm coming to you live from Flatbush with all the Haitian energy I can serve you on a platter. Physically in Brooklyn, but very much mentally anywhere the South is, anywhere Megan Thee Stallion is, you can find me. I'm a director and dramaturg working at the intersections of theater, Black studies, and trans studies.
Mm-hmm. Zachariah?
Hi, I'm Zachariah Ezer. I am a playwright, a dramaturg, and an Afro-pessimist theorist. I'm in Austin, Texas, because I am currently pursuing an MFA at the University of Texas.
Thank you, thank you. So now we have those introductions who, you know, very, very short give us an impression. Of course, their real introduction is their work, which can be seen or has already been seen at Prelude. maybe we'll start to David. David, when you and Miranda, when you put the festival together, what were you looking for?
Well, the theme of the festival is Sites of Revolution, and we were looking for work that was engaging with the idea of either a major change or a kind of reckoning. And, our goal was really to look at as many sites as possible, not only, of course, the kind of revolutionary activity that you see playing out in the streets, from the uprisings this summer to various protests, to phone banking and other things we might understand under the rubric of politics, but also these revolutionary acts of caretaking, of imagination, of reckonings between families and also oneself in certain ways. So we felt it was important to open up this idea, which of course has been so closely associated with a certain kind of experimental theater, especially in the United States, and really kind of blow it open as much as possible, and to create spaces where people could engage with the work. And something that was important to us from the beginning was creating work that was specifically was created with the intention of being online. Of course, when the pandemic hit in March and April, a lot of people moved or adapted activities. That was very exciting and great. But we wanted to create something where people were invited specifically to make use of the website and the web and its tools, from Zoom to Google Docs to video games in the case of Speedrun, which is really exciting. So people have taken up that charge in various ways. Frank, do you mind if I ask maybe Mei Ann to say a little bit about Mei Ann's project, since it's ongoing, and I think as with all these other projects, encapsulate some of the ways in which we've turned the website and Prelude into a site where people can, have a kind of those kinds of experiences.
Yeah, that's good. Mei Ann, of course, what does she tell us about Hold, which is kind of a bookend of the festival, also of the festival days?
Yeah, I love the theme of Sites of Revolution right now, right? And what an offering to be able to think about what that might be, and where that actually happens. Where does a revolution actually happen first? I think that was the big question that I started to ask. And I thought about how my body is like, the revolution has to happen in my body and in my mind before anything can happen outside that does not perpetuate the same old thing that happens. And I think in this time in particular, there just feels like there's a lot of screaming, like quite literally. The presidential debates, the other person has to be muted when the other person is speaking. That is actually the reality of our culture right now. And one thing that I started to feel that I needed was a space to practice the things towards where my mind and my body can be ready for revolution. And that in itself, the practice, is the revolution. That's something that I start to come up with. So I work a lot with contemplative practice, and I start to think about what can actually hold the day and hold the festival. And so I start to think about the ways in which what would happen if we were to sit together in the morning and in the evening. It's a practice that kept me alive during pandemic. And to be able to sort of know that people are doing that and what it means to be in silence together in Zoom, where usually we're talking to each other, at each other, trying to do something with the time. And what happens if we stop trying to do something with the time in order to understand what's actually happening in the mind, and be able to watch the mind and practice this and see the stories that we're spinning all the time in the mind. To be able to start to understand that profoundly. So in the morning, 8:30 to 9, I offer some sort of seed of reflection. And then the idea is that the sun of the day would nurture it. And at night, we would have the rain of prayers. And so I've asked people to come. Part of practice, even in silence and sitting, is Sangha, is community. And so I've asked who I call queer holies to come through. And these are people who I feel like through their art have such a deep access to the divine that like when I'm there in their art, I'm like, oh, I see it, I feel it, I'm there, you have realigned me in my spirit. People like Diana O, people like Daniel Alexander Jones really blessed us last night. Oh my God, wow. I'm still sitting. I think I have to work on that prayer for like a year. And the idea is that what can come out, what can be shared after sitting in 20 minutes of silence? What has the sitting in silence prepared the animal body to receive? And what is the way in which we receive it once we do that together? And how that can be a practice throughout time. So I also thought about it as preparing the body to listen to all of these incredible folks' work. That there is like a way in which by doing so, we are more prepared to understand the complexities of their work, which like I know much of a lot of their works, and I'm honored to be like my name next to these people's names. The final sit will be an hour instead of half an hour. Usually it's 8:30 to 9 in the morning and 10 to 10:30 at night. And we're gonna make space, a little bit more space for people to share their experiences. And yeah, so that's how it's going. Thanks for letting me speak.
Great, thank you. Misha, if we follow.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I'm really resonating with what Mei Ann was saying about a kind of an opportunity to look inward in this moment as well as outward. And yeah, the project that I've been working on and that I shared 2 installations of in the Prelude Festival is called Vichitra, and it's a project that emerged out of this moment. Specifically, it was a kind of happy accident that emerged out of a kind of requirement to pivot and make work in the online space. And it's specifically been an opportunity for me to think about the sort of panoply of things that might fall under the umbrella of queer South Asian experimentation. I've been calling the project an experiment in queer South Asian imagination. And it's an ongoing series of audiovisual experiments, each of which has a radically different focus in terms of content, but it's an exploration in collaboration with a sound designer and a video artist, and the project coheres really through those sort of aesthetic considerations. But what's been great for me, it's been surprising how much someone asked me the other day in another context, what my sort of after all of this, which is so much a part of the conversations that I'm having these days. There's an imagination of after all of this, which I'm not sure is precisely the sort of like right way to think about it. But someone asked me how, what I wanted my sort of like daily life as an artist to look like after all of this. And in the moment of being asked that, I registered strangely that like, in terms of like how I'm spending my hours on a daily basis, this is actually much closer to the way that I would like to be functioning as an artist, in some ways, by virtue of like a lot of the sort of usual pulls on my time having been cut, a lot of the strings that I'm usually tethered to having been cut, and having the opportunity to function in working in Vichitra in particular as a kind of expansive sort of creative thinker in terms of thinking about who I'm functioning kind of as a curator and a maker, and I'm learning all kinds of new skills in the making of this piece that is really exciting. Like, I don't know, I'm like credited as an audio editor on the most recent episode. And I think that like, and for me, I think from the outset of launching this project, the first episode that was shown at Prelude is a patchwork of dreams, literal sort of night dreams that folks had at night and then remembered in the morning, that we solicited from queer South Asian folks from all over the world, voice memos that were recorded. And then the second episode is a single, that first piece is multivocal, and the second piece is my voice, a piece that I narrated and wrote. And it's a completely different sort of sonic experience than the first one. But each of those installations has allowed me the opportunity to lean into a different kind of making. And I've, as David mentioned, been wanting with this project to think really actively about like what it means to make for this medium and learn from the folks in our universe that are experts in that. And so in working with a sound designer and a video artist who work actively in the video and podcasting universes, for example, it's been I'm like, oh, okay, we do actually consume. I think theater folks have been like, how do we reinvent the wheel in this moment? And it's been interesting for me to sort of like lean into an understanding of the fact that we already all consume sonic and video content on a daily basis. So I'm like, what tools can I draw upon in this very particular, in this sort of, I don't want to say niche because that's exactly what I don't think it is, but I'm like, okay, what are the various kinds of questions that I can ask inside of queer South Asian experimentation and imagination while living inside of this like 30-minute audio-driven sort of visual podcast landscape.
Who wants to go next?
I mean, we'll just go at the same time, right? Yeah, so Speedrun is like a short theatrical-ish, film-esque piece that makes use of Super Mario Brothers, sort of, to talk about socialism. Essentially, like the idea came about where I'm thinking a lot about how two thoughts. One is that my experience as a leftist and a Black leftist in a lot of socialist and social adjacent spaces has been annoying, to say the least. You would hope that in like far left spaces they would have sort of a better kind of intersectional understanding, but most of these places are white-run organizations and have the same kind of mindset as all other white-run organizations, because being progressive on one valence doesn't necessarily mean you're progressive on any others. So I wanted to talk about that. And the other thought I was having was that like, it's a Milton Friedman thing, who I'm not a big fan of, but this is a good thought, right? The idea isn't a crisis, the idea is lying around. And right now, socialism is an idea that's lying around very like at the fore. Unfortunately, not in this session's electoral politics, but it's still like kind of, the specter haunting American politics right now. And so when we do pick up this idea, as I think we inevitably will, I do want to talk about the fact that like Black people are, kind of very early like progenitors of a lot of socialist theory, and they're kind of left out of the conversation a lot. And so that when we do pick up this idea that doesn't continue to happen. Yeah, and then I'll let Dominique talk, and then I'll maybe talk a little more about the technical part.
Yeah, and I think for another big part of it is how does, and this is a recent thought that you and I think are coming to, is like, what are the possibilities that slavery has made possible, right? A big theme in this play is this idea that the white folks in it have had more time to let their ideas of revolution and anger ripen into something else, right? How does slavery allow that to happen? And how does this sort of idea of socialism, which like we've had versions of in the US, right? I'm thinking about the New Deal and the way that like my grandfather and tons of other Black people were just left out of these policies, and the policies were made in such a way that Black people could not access them, right? How does slavery enable the notions and ideas we have of a civil society, and how do those ideas of a civil society, shout out to Frank Wilderson, leave Black people out, right?
Absolutely. Similarly, right, like the long history of Black union exclusion is very much on our minds of this. And so, yeah, we think that like, and so how we kind of take that to speedrun is that speedrun is this kind of like interestingly socialist practice kind of, which is that like individuals get like credit for speedrunning, if you don't know, is beating a video game really fast and using whatever strategies you can, maybe even breaking the game a little bit to be able to do that. It's like a community, and people get credit for like achievements, but people always remember if you push the conversation forward, the community always remembers you, like if you come up with a technique. And so I thought speedrunning would be a good way to explore that. And for us, the tech came into play, which is that our original idea, and the play as written, has a literal speedrun in it, but where you would speedrun Super Mario Brothers while the play was happening. But in traditional speedruns, they get to talk about like their audio, like they get to talk and like, you know, it's react to the speedrun as they're doing it. So they usually don't get auto detected by YouTube's like a copyright algorithm. And so we were a little worried about that, to be honest. So we decided to, you know, as we are all doing in this time, innovate, find a new thing. So we got to engage our very talented designer, Elizaveta Krashenko, who just looked at the scenes that we needed, and when we would like cut back to the speedrun and just made them out of like, just animated them completely. And so that was a really like nice addition to the piece. And I feel like it helps a little bit because the piece is so much like about Super Mario Brothers, but like slightly different. Being able to see Super Mario Brothers literally just be slightly different I think adds to kind of the atmosphere a little bit.
I have a question for Zachariah and Dominique. Something that struck me about your proposal was this invocation of Afro-pessimism. Of course, with Frank Wilderson's book this year, that term has gotten a lot of attention. But you could think of you could look at Orlando Patterson as one inception point of it, and I'm sure other people have taken it back further. I think Dominique, you mentioned Cedric Robinson. So how does that body of work? One, how might you define it briefly for people who are coming to the term for the first or very nascent time, and how does it inform your work?
Yeah. Zach and I have two divergent paths in Afro-pessimism, and two sort of like separate interests. Mine is rooted a lot more in like the anti-Blackness of gender. And so, and how gender as an idea and as a concept is a position for the captive and not for the slave, and what that means when you apply concepts of like gender to the captive body and what that does to it, right? Because we think of concepts of like gender and sexuality and disability emerging at the same time as slavery in the US, when actually I think a better way to think about it and frame it is that slavery as an institution enabled these things to grow underneath it. And so for me at least, Afro-pessimism as a theory, and I think if you want to get into it, maybe read his first book and not Afro-pessimism. There are a lot of reviews of like Afro-pessimism as a book without engaging his first text, Red, White, and Black, US antagonisms in the history of cinema, or something like that. And it's a theory that articulates the sort of fungibility of Black people around the world and makes a case that slavery as an event created a split between people we recognize as humans, people who operate inside of communities and know each other, and people we recognize as slaves. And I'll slide to Zach for the follow-up.
Yeah, kind of in the place I come in, I'm interested in it kind of in a more, from a class analysis and also from a like more traditional philosophy background. So right, like when you think of like the Enlightenment and creation of the human is always defined as like, what is it defined as? What is it compared to, essentially, right? Like the human is defined as free, self-determining, etc., right? So in order to know the limits and the domain of that freedom, you have to look at like the unfreedom, who is made unfree, right? And that's like the creation of the human is also the creation of the slave as an ontological category. Like if Afro-pessimism in a nutshell to me is that like, is the ontological precondition of the world that we live in that the slave experiences violence constantly, and for no reason other than the coherence of the world. And as such, Afro-pessimism is trying to chart what that all is, how that affects us, and luckily us as in Black people, and what we can do about it. And really the best answer we have is to end the world as we know it and do something new. And that luckily there's a nice generation after the Wilderson generation of the original Afro-pessimists who are starting to do some of that work. And especially a lot of women and non-binary folks who are especially doing that work on gender, which is great.
It's interesting. On one hand, it's something very personal, dreams, meditation that looks inside. On the other hand, your work of speedrun looks at structures and over centuries and systematic repression. You know, they're like two poles. What do you guys think? What is the role of the artist at the moment, that unprecedented moment that we experience right now? What can art do?
I mean, I'm so excited by what y'all are saying, and I'm always thinking about these structures and forms that have been imposed along the way that we just accept as true, right? So I'm thinking about how Freud, right? If you look at the id, the superego, that's actually a construction of our psyche that places one in dominance of another. And that in itself will help us, will encourage us. If we think of our psyche that way, we are just going to replicate that same structure outside of ourselves in our society continually. And the scholar that brought that up, I remember like being at a conference and hearing this paper, and she was basically saying like, we have to go to Fanon. We actually have to go to Fanon, who, you're right, it's like we actually have to tear this we have to stop the thing. We actually have to do so. I mean, artists, you know, if you're asking like what artists have to do, like it's our power of imagination. We kind of have to imagine ourselves out of this, right? Or imagines ourselves into the destruction in which we can survive. Like, yes, to destroying the system, and then how do we survive beyond the system? Or who should survive beyond the system, or how, like who will uphold the systems, or how are the systems upheld? And, you know, like I remember I was at another call where Diana Milosevic from the Da Theater of Belgrade was talking, and I remember what she said. She was like, we have to outlast them. That's our job, is resilience. We have to outlast it, you know? So it's both like, I don't know, I'm thinking about how artists, we both have to figure out how to outlast it, and also like how to imagine. I feel like, Dominique, you're like so excited. You want to speak. Oh my God, I want to hear what you have to say.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, I think, and this is not to the question, it's just something that you said that it always makes me think about, is like the actual reality is, right? Like the state is not keeping us safe. And there are people who are surviving without it right now, right? Like abolition as an idea is a thing that is already present in communities. What do you do when the cops don't come to your neighborhood, right? Like, what do you and the people around you do when the cops ignore you? What do you do when the only time the government like recognizes you as a person is when it's time for you to cast a ballot that is going to get a bomb dropped on someone, right? Like, what do you do in that other time? And like the thing that you're talking about is already existing. How do we continue to lean into it? And I think more importantly is like, how do we convince the people in power that like the thing they should be, right, is abolitionists, and that this state thing isn't serving anyone, and that maybe we can do something else. And I just want to thank you for bringing that up, man.
Yeah, but how do you get people to like divest from the thing that serves them, or they think it serves them?
I think that's what our job is, which is that I think you were right on there with political imagination, which is that I think that like when we're doing our best work, it's like agitprop. Is like we are putting like these like new ideas into the world. We're like shifting the like Overton window so that like, I mean, you know, 10 months ago, abolition was like prison abolition was like among non-radical circles a joke, right? They're like, oh yeah, sure, what are we gonna do with all the murderers and rapists? And everyone would just say that, and that would be the end of the discussion, right? Like now we're actually able to have a conversation because because various things have happened to shift the overtone into left. And that's what we do. We make sure that like when events happen, the ideas lying around are our ideas, so that they're the ones that get picked up. And so I think injecting like, you know, the best thoughts we have into discourse is what our job is.
And recognizing what the things are too. Like I feel like it's part of us being like, I think our job is also to be able to see it and name it and be like, this is actually what's going on. We've been duped to think that this is blank, but really this is blank. And how are we not feeding into it again and again and again, right? That's what I'm always thinking. I think about how, I think about trauma porn, right? On stage. And I think about how like that discourse of it, or the way I see myself as an Asian femme depicted, and like what that is in terms of like how deeply I want Asian performers to be hired, and yet the only thing they get to do are that which is within the white imagination, like continually, always, even like all the time. And I think about like how much more do I have to be complicit, to gain enough power to change it? And by that time, will I have been complicit long enough that I am too tied to my success?
Absolutely. I think that, yeah, I'm to reference, Jimmy brought up earlier, the first Wilderson book, specifically with Black Bodies, the way that they were most often early seen on film was just in recordings of lynchings. So it's just sort of like, yeah, there are these ways that like we do have to change what the thing is used for. And it is one of those things where it's like, at what level can we engage with the thing without and change the thing without being changed? And that is definitely like, I feel like our eternal struggle.
Last question. It sounded like, you know, speed round, you guys all of a sudden are creating video games. Misha says, I'm credited as a sound editor for the first time. Mei Ann, in a way, you are a curator for your series, you know, which is a long durational site performance in a way. Do you feel this is a moment where everybody does something they haven't done before? And how does that affect the work?
Well, I've never done this before. It is something I do, right? So like, I've never done hold before per se, but it is something I do. I feel like this is actually a practice and a community that has emerged from my life. And you know, I like how you say like curator of a series, and I'm like, is that what I did? I thought I was making a community. I thought I was asking my elders and my friends who I needed to pray for me to pray for us. Oh, I guess that's also a curator of a series. but the change of language and the frame upon it, for me, helped me contextualize performance as a site of healing and as a site of gathering in a way that requires participation of doing nothing. And like, so I guess for me, like, yeah, I'm doing something new and what that means to me is like thinking about emergence and thinking about the next step being that which has required everything before, and to go about something in a way that and these are principles that I've always had, right? The principle of like, I will do it in a way that no matter what happens, it was worth it. So with each of the people that I curated, I sat with them for half an hour, we meditated together, and then we talked and we caught up. And it was this building of something that is underneath that didn't get shown, but it was there. It was underneath it. And so I think to me, it's like, yes to the new, but coming from a lifetime of practice.
Is Corona changing the way you work? That's the question. Short term, but long term also.
This isn't really I'm just sort of like, I'm sitting and listening, and I don't know precisely what question I'm responding to, but I think that I think that in this moment, I find myself in a place of sort of many different valences of uncertainty. I feel like, and that like lack of certainty and surety. I think that I've often talked about my sort of relationship to my work as an artist as, I think it's been like a good thesis statement for me in the past to like want to move into my work from a place of having not yet figured out what the upshot of what I'm making will be. But I feel that in this moment, more than ever, like the idea that I am sort of moving into making and creating from like a deeply ambivalent place or an uncertain place inside of myself in terms of like how shall I say it? Like in terms of the capacity or scope or like, in terms of what my work like is meant to or can do. I think that there's a kind of like, Mei Ann, you mentioned ego and id and Freud. And I think I've been spending a lot of time this year just sort of like reflecting on, in some ways, the arrogance with which I've approached my relationship to my work in the past. And I don't know if arrogance is quite the right word, but maybe just sort of like the ego with which by virtue of like the ways in which we are required to sell ourselves in the field and in the industry in order to create, in terms of like artist statement-defying ourselves and mission statement-defying ourselves and branding ourselves in particular ways. I think there's a kind of language around like the sort of like prefigurative attempt of my work that I have developed over my life as an artist that is like, this work will do this, that I find has fallen sort of disconcertingly, but also usefully away in the last few months, in the sense that I'm like, I don't quite, you're asking what is the role of an artist, and I can only speak for myself, but I don't really know right now for myself how to answer that question in a like, from a place of like I can imagine, and I'm so sort of like inspired to be listening to all three of you in terms of the ways that you're thinking about this moment. And I've also always been really attracted to like, I also am drawn toward the sort of like the strands of theory that move us towards that recognition of like the fact that I often think about like this article by Stephanie Smallwood that always like, that blew my mind when I first read it, in terms of thinking about the fact that like, that instead of thinking about like the relationship between freedom and slavery as being like a, how does she put it? But like the way in which we think about like slavery in the New World having given rise to, having given a sort of material injection to the possibility of like enlightenment and rights-based thinking in Europe, the fact that like in fact it was slavery itself that like that wage labor emerges out of like the idea of the owned body, and that kind of like I'm super inspired by listening to the two of you talk about your relationship to Afro-pessimism that you're expressing so articulately. And I'm just sort of like sitting here in a place of like useful confusion. I think the like you're talking about like how has Corona changed my relationship to making, and it has, I think, sort of like disoriented me like totally, in a way that not it has disoriented me totally, but like the tethers of like Mei Ann, you were talking about like if I participate in it enough, how wedded to the structures of the industry do I become? And I feel like having those sort of marionette strings snipped in some ways over the course of the last 8 to 10 months, I find myself like having to, in terms of reckoning, right? I find myself having to sort of like re-ask myself all kinds of questions that had become, like the things that had meant the most to me had become sound bites and like ways of selling myself. Like my most sort of cherished political values had become useful, like useful language by which to sort of reinvest myself in a particular kind of relationship with theaters and institutions.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'm curious on the question of your relationship between theater institutions. This is for everyone. What do you want to see from the field? And what have you seen from the field that has been inspiring? I'll just say briefly, for Miranda and I, we've often talked about what Soho Rep is doing in terms of bringing artists on the payroll. There's been parts of me that have thought we should just turn the entire nonprofit theater industry into one large mutual aid sector, just liquidate the assets, turn into healthcare and everything else. And that runs along a long line. I mean, that very vague idea for me is probably the product of many, many years of thinking about abolition within the context of arts and culture. And, you can think off of Fred Moten and Stefano Harney's critique in the university and their comments that, the university is the privatization of what should be shared. That's a very simplistic version of their thesis, but I'm curious, however earthy or theoretical this wants to be for you, what do you want to see from the field, and maybe specifically those institutions who claim and in some cases do serve artists such as yourselves?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this question a lot, and I think that it really hit a head for me in May. It's just like that straight week where like Black people were dying, which is not different from any other week, but where it seemed like there was a lot of attention being given to it. And I think a big thing that I was watching was this conversation that was happening about policing and the way that the way that police function, right, and the necessity of the call for abolition as an end to like policing in the police state. And a thing that I think started to unravel for me, and Zach and I have talked about this a lot, is that like the same police that are prowling the streets are the same police that are sitting on theaters boards and are running institutions, right? That the way that policing works is a deep practice that so many of us have internalized, that Black people and also people of color to a larger extent are like policed in these institutions, right? That our ideas, our bodies, the way we make, the way we think about making, the way we engage with like what Mei Ann was talking about earlier, right? Like this idea of trauma porn. Saidiya Hartman reminds us that like the Black pain does not arrest the reader. It does not incite a crisis, right? So what does that mean? What are these stories doing? Are they changing things? Or are they in a line, in a tradition of work that like, leads us nowhere? And so I think for me, one of the big ones is like I'd like to see an ending to the policing inside of these institutions, which might be in a roundabout way and ask to end the institutions. I'm not really sure. I also think that like for a lot of white institutions specifically, how are resources being moved and how are they being moved around to support, I think explicitly here, like Black theaters, Asian theaters, Latinx theaters, right? Like how are we thinking about who we are supporting and who gets that support on a state level, on a donor level? And one big one for me is like, I'd just like to see more money going towards hashtag defund white theaters, maybe. I'd like to see more money going towards theaters of color who are doing the work that we need to be doing all the time, right? Without like any fanfare, without having to make a big press release about it. How do we support those institutions, both as artists and like thinking about this in a large scale way? How do we make sure that those institutions are supported and taken care of is like, I think my two sort of like industry-wide thoughts. Also unions. I feel like arts administrators need unions because they'd be working 60 hours a week and they're supposed to be working like 40, and 60 is low. 60 is a low ball number for like how much work arts administrators do. I think an arts admin union would be very, very helpful.
Right, seconded that, and I'm like very much really like kind of workers cooperative about it, which is that like I think that functions of hierarchy in a lot of these organizations are what allow the policing to occur. I mean, there's larger like societal and like libidinal economy issues, but I think that like it would be a huge step for it to be like theater, like everyone who works in theater, it's not necessarily like another industry where you don't maybe like become the marketing exec for an airplane parts company because you love airplane parts, but everyone in a theater loves theater. Why else would you take the honestly like low pay compared to like other industries? Like half the people in theater are like people who are theater people who not do anything else, and I'm certainly one. But the other half of them are like marketing and development execs who are just like, who love theater and will love it so much they'll take less money. The fact that they don't get to vote on like the things that matter to them in the institution, and they just have to like market or develop for whatever, right? Like the essentially the CEO of the nonprofit says they have to do is a little ridiculous. Also, especially the way that like people of color at a lot of institutions are kept out of artistic departments means that they don't get to decide either. So like if a person of color who's like super interested in theater finally gets to work at a place they want to work, it's rarely in a decision-making place. So yeah, like my like big thing that I would love to see is that if we only changed one thing, I think we should change a million more things than one, but is to sort of like in these institutions, like democratize and like kind of flatten the hierarchy so that everyone can get a say in like making this thing that we all obviously care about. Otherwise we wouldn't be here.
Yeah, so maybe we can get a bit closer to also David's original question. What are you guys working on also at the moment? And after your prelude, what is on your mind? What is your imagination? What is your vision about the piece? Of course, we show excerpts, but what are you all thinking about? What you're working on? What would you like to do? Which perhaps you couldn't, but what is on your minds as projects?
Again, I think I'm just, I can speak to, I think I've turned to a sort of, I'm thinking kind of granularly about like, it's been useful for me to have the opportunity in making these episodes of this project, which is sort of what is on the horizon for me by virtue of having like made made this ongoing series, I'm like, oh, everything that I make falls under the umbrella of this series now, which is nice. I'm like, cool, anything I make is the queer South Asian imagination. So that is gonna be the next episode of the project. But I'm working, the 4th episode is, that's coming out in December, is a collaboration with some queer Carnatic musicians. And it's been really like, I don't know, there again, I'm sort of like feeling a kind of, it's been really wonderful. Also, I want to shout out Cameron Neal and Jeremy Bloom, who are the core collaborators on Vichitra, who I didn't mention earlier. They are the video artist and sound designer that I was speaking of in the abstract. But it's been really wonderful just to sort of like lean into these unusual collaborations that I might not have had the opportunity to. And really, I mean, to be frank, like what I'm making is not theater right now. It is happening in the context of it is being commissioned by theaters because theaters are who I know. But it's like, they are visual podcasts, they're short films, they're not, I think that there's a useful sort of collapsing of those boundaries that has been helpful for me, because I feel like I've always been that person in like theater rooms when the question is asked, like, when there's a sort of preciousness around what theater is, I'm always like, is it as like distinct as we imagine it to be from these other forms? Yeah, so I'm like doing a thing that I never would have had the opportunity to do, which is just sort of like kind of like sitting in conversation with Carnatic classical musicians and like developing a new sort of like half an hour long composition based on these sort of 7th century, 8th century, 9th century texts about like, there's this woman there's this legendary figure in Carnatic music and in the South Indian tradition named Avayar, who is a young girl who like asks to be transformed into an old woman in order to, she's like, all I want in life is to be an old woman so I can just bypass the whole like having to get married and having to like have a man in my life thing. And she's this like she's this sort of like kind of deliciously childlike figure in an old woman's body. And also there's a like, can I become an old woman in order to like desire the god? Like there's a like the god that she, Murugan, who in the South Indian tradition is usually portrayed as a young boy. She's like, I want to become an old woman so I can be this sort of maternal, wise figure and like love the god from a like motherly place. So that project is just an opportunity. I'm working with Rupa Mahadevan and Shiv Subramaniam, and we're just like, it's like, you know, it's like we're making new music. That's what the piece is. New compositions based on these old texts, and they're all about these sort of yearnings for different kinds of transformation. So like an old, like these various writers in the Carnatic tradition who are like, I yearn to become like a step in the temple, like stairway leading up to the temple, rather than being one of the devotees. I want to be a step in the temple so that I can like look directly up into the mouth of the god. Or so we're just like looking at these various different kinds of transformations, and it's been super fun to lean into that kind of like granular thinking. Just kind of like, okay, I want to deal with this very tiny piece of text, this very tiny story, and see what it has to offer up to me in this moment. Mm-hmm.
I'm doing a lot of sleeping, a lot of sleeping these days, which I don't feel like I got to do a lot of in the before times, which is great. Melatonin is so nice. Waking up at like 10 a.m. without knowing that there probably isn't going to be a rehearsal today is like freeing. I don't feel like we talk a lot about like the labor of being a director, which is something I know I learned in part from watching Mei Ann. I have never seen someone so busy. And so for me, one of the sort of the big first things I decided to do was like, what if I just pull everything back and like I actually just go to bed more and I enjoy my room more. And so for me, I think like sleeping has become a big part of my practice and a big part of my life in a way that it wasn't. And also just like being able to walk around my neighborhood at times that aren't like 10 p.m. at night because I'm coming home from like a work day. It feels like for me, it's less in this moment making art or like thinking about art as much, but really just taking the time to check in with like Dominique without any sort of relation to the labor that I would usually be doing right now, which has been I feel really, really nice about. I think that's maybe a joy of being a freelancer right now. And so when projects do come, it's like, oh, I can actually focus on making this mixtape with Diane Xavier, which I'm gonna love doing in February, right? It's like being able to like act like, oh, Zach wants to do this thing for Prelude. Yeah, I ain't doing stuff right now. Let's do it. Let's make like a video game and see what happens with it, right? The lack of like normal everyday structure that I think I was relying on before has really freed me up to do other things, which are both like other things more personally and just like reading again. I love being back to like just reading Scenes of Subjugation by Sylvia Hartman and being like, oh, I'm still not done with the work, right? And just sort of that kind of thing right now.
Right, definitely want to second that. I feel very like, well, I quote the Communist Manifesto twice. Yes, I will. Like, I get to like work a little bit in the morning. I get to, proverbially, because go fish in the afternoon and then like read a little bit at night. I get to kind of like, my life balance is better. And also like, Dominique uses the word refusal a lot to talk about this, where it's just sort of like, no, I will not engage with the machine right now because honestly, I'm at my house and you can't get me. And that's pretty great. And for me, what that is like working as an early career playwright. I feel part of it is that I'm in school. Part of it is also just that, like, this time is made like I'm free from the like you must write one play a year and then you will give it to everyone who could possibly care about it, and hopefully one of them will care and that will like move you around. No, now I'm writing weird Afro-pessimistic experiments, and Dominique, I'll call Dominique when I finish one and I'm like, this one doesn't make sense yet. Help me make it make sense, and then we'll do something with it. So yeah, now Speedrun is actually, it's part of a collection of Afro-pessimistic experiments that I'm working on actually before the pandemic, but the has really like made me care about that way more than anything else I'm working on. So we got 3 and there's gonna be a 4th one. They will be somewhere, sometime when we feel like it, and then they will all be done, and then they will once again be somewhere sometime.
A lot of my creative practice is actually as a director, dramaturg, and so I'm in multiple processes right now, doing work about Hong Kong protests, doing work about Chinese American history. Little Shop of Horrors is a live puppet film, genderqueered. That's another thing that I'm up to, there's a lot going on as a director. And doing this was phenomenal for me because it rooted me in a practice of making space that's coming from my body, right? And so I'm so grateful to David and Miranda for including me in this. And people have actually talked about, like, can we continue? Does it stop with Prelude? Can we continue? Can we support? Can we figure out a community that will continue to do this in some way, shape, or form that's not just on my body, but that we gather? And so that's a beautiful thing that's about to happen. And I'm also obsessed with doing new things that really terrify me. As an artistic director of Musical Theater Factory, I have access to like the most phenomenal singers in the world, and I've been asked to do a piece and make a text, make something from a line from a John Lewis speech, and then they put it all together of all of these artists. And I've decided that I should write the song and sing the song, which is not something I do, but I must because it terrifies me. So I am involving people to help me out, but I'm like, I could really ask these 10 phenomenal, like, people on, to sing this, but no, I must put my voice out there in some way, shape, or form. So I'm continuing to force myself to do things that scare me, like learn GarageBand, whatever. And I also am going to make an app. I'm putting it out there. I'm saying it because then I'm have to do it. And the app is called Zen Master, and it will pull you through the different ways and contain syncretic wisdom in which you can opt into what you need. I'm feeling like an imposter, and then you press it, and then different game-like structures will pop up so that it guides you through that particular thing that you're feeling into koans and parables from all the different places, crowdsourced so that people can also offer that. So that's the app that I'm working on. There we go.
Incredible. David, do you have another question? If not, I would say, as a closing question, what inspires you at the moment? Who do you follow? What do you read? What do you listen to in music or other shows you see online? What keeps you? Is there something that you look up to at the moment? What do you do?
This is a quick sort of. This is just I just wanted to. I was like, oh, I should definitely mention that the third episode of Vichitra is currently running at Ars Nova, not as a sort of I was like, it started yesterday, and it was a collaboration between my partner Cameron Neal and I just would have been remiss if I didn't say it. It's a series of conversations with. The frame of the piece is my partner and I'm trying to situate our interracial relationship in a larger constellation of Black and South Asian encounters. And I guess what has been inspiring to me is having these interviews with folks from, I feel like because I've become an interviewer in the process of making this piece, having conversations with folks that I usually wouldn't have time to have conversations with has been really remarkable and inspiring, sitting and listening to someone I've known my whole life, 84-year-old woman, talk about oh, the first time I ever saw a Black person was when I was 8 years old during World War II in Eastern India, when Black American soldiers drove trucks through our town and threw Butterfinger chocolates at us. And I'm like, you were alive during World War II, not a thing that I ever would have had the opportunity to hear from you. So yeah, that's having conversations with people has been inspiring to me.
I'm with Misha, and I think it's I'm feeling the possibility of being hyper present with the things that are actually happening inside me and with me. I held a baby, a 10-month-old baby. I'm not desiring to be a parent. I've never really had, the clock is not there. It's not even on the shelf. It's not there. And I held this baby. And after that, I was like, oh, this is so sweet, so cute. Oh, here we are. And then I left the house and I started to cry. It just started to overwhelm. It was such a powerful experience. And I started to ask myself, why am I responding this way? And I realized that it is the only moment of touch I've had in such a long time that was so uncomplicated and filled with pure joy, and that I did not need to be in any way defensive, and I did not need protection. Instead, it was the other way around. So I'm really sitting with experience right now.
I reading or inspired. There are two sources for me right now. The first is Netflix finally putting Black sitcoms on Netflix, and so it's just me watching Half and Half and One on One and The Parkers and Moesha, and just having going back to a part of my childhood that a lot of non-Black people, I think, oftentimes just aren't privy to. And so it's been great to sort of have that moment. And then I built a sort of core curriculum for myself with readings. I'm trying to read all of Saidiya Hartman's canon before next year, which is to say like the first pass of a lot of things, finally finishing scenes. And I'm reading this other book called Becoming Human, Matter and Meaning in an Anti-Black World by Zakiya Amon Jackson. So it's a lot of returning to readings I've been putting off, a lot of like finally having the chance to like watch panels, which is great because like I can just watch Saidiya Hartman do a panel now, which is fucking amazing. She has New Yorker articles, which is great. And it's just sort of like finally being able to follow the theorists and thinkers whose books have been so important to me in real time, because now they are, I think, in the middle of doing their projects, more free to speak and like do things like this. So that's been really inspirational. Also, just like what Mei Ann just said really messed me up with the baby. That's going on my list now. So thank you for that, Mei Ann.
Right. Yeah. Like Austin, Texas babies. I'm gonna find one of you, I think. But yeah, no, I definitely agree with Dominique. I'm doing a lot of the theoretical reading situation. I'm kind of working my way through a lot of the foundational texts of Afro-pessimism, either visiting or revisiting. So that's like the early Wilderson and Hartman, who are the two co-founders of the discipline. And reading, honestly, and I'm doing a lot of like television studies stuff right now for school. And the thing that has really struck me is that like, one thing that like they did a lot, and maybe it was a cheap ploy then, but it gets me every time, is that like truly they seem to have found the most adorable Black kids to be the first Black kids on TV. So there's like the first like non-stereotyped Black show, the show called Julia, and the son in that is so adorable. And so I'm just watching all of Julia because they just like put the camera on him for like maybe 5 minutes at a time and just watch him play. And I'm just crying. And so that's just great stuff. And then also, whenever anyone's asking what my inspirations are, I must always plug Alicia Harris. She is the greatest living playwright, and find anything you can by her on the internet and pay her money for it, because it's all good.
Amazing. David, any thoughts?
No, this has been fantastic. It's a real privilege and honor to have all of you involved with the festival. I just also want to thank Miranda Heyman, the co-curator, along with our incredible producing team, Sammy Moriali, Lucy Powis, Sammy Pine, our graphic designer, Lena Mitchell, our website developer, Lorena Ramirez Lopez, Harry, our stage manager. So there's a really great team, and Andy Lerner from the Segal Center as well. So there's a really great team behind me. I'm just the representative because everyone else is making the festival run and work, and I get to spend this time with all of you, which I'm really grateful, but I am just a mere emanation of this larger ensemble. So, thank you all for joining us. It's been so great. And people check out the work. Also, I want to make a plug. I did this yesterday. I'm going to do it every day. Please listen and watch the work with real speakers. Don't use your little Mac internal speaker. Make sure you can hear the sound, because it's so beautiful, not only for, quote unquote sound pieces like Misha's, but everything, even the silence in Mei Ann, you really need, that dynamic. So, and check out all these works on preludenyc2020.com.
Yeah, that's important. Also, work that already has been shown is still there. It's archived. Some of it you can still re-experience, even so they are released over time. It's quite interesting. It's like a little Netflix series for the New York downtown theater, but just in a completely different and new way and form. We have never done this. It's incredible what shape this festival took. And I think it is truly something to notice and to think about, and helps us to create meaning. So we're going to have throughout the week more talks with the Prelude artists, and also a moment to listen what New York artists are thinking about. Also significant New York artists, emerging artists, and more artists truly from all the communities. And we have to listen very closely and look these ideas about, also Kelsey talked about it yesterday, like Mei Ann, about healing, and Dominique and Zach about the structures, the system that isn't really working, and the work of Misha and his communities. How do you bridge South Asian and American and African? I mean, how do you really deal with it? How do you put it together? And what do you produce? These dreams he records of people, and so this is something we all should be thinking about, and how could it reflect or maybe implement this in our lives. So really, thank you all for listening. Thanks for HowlRound to keep us on their great digital platform. So I hope you all will stay safe and tune in again tomorrow. Thank you all for participating, and all of you guys, again, thank you for taking the time and energy to be with us and to participate in this really inspiring Prelude Festival that asks a lot of questions. It's not explaining anything, but it's exploring. And that is important. So thank you all. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Guys.
Bye-bye.